Hello and welcome to another conversation about conversations. I am your co-host Jacob Kubrak, and with me as always is the man, the myth, the legend, Ivan Farber.
Woohoo! Thank you, Jacob. Everybody needs an introduction like that. I know people are starting to talk to me. They're coming up and they're saying, "Hey, is this the man, the myth, and the legend?" So very good of you.
Do you choose just one, or do you go with all three?
I mean, you're the one who coined the phrase for me, so
Yeah,
go with all three.
we got to get you fired up into these podcasts, and
It's important.
yeah. But hey, before we jump into it, let's hand it over and thank our sponsors here for this episode. First and foremost, 503 Building, a place where you can get any custom woodwork done. Just do an incredible job, whether it's a table, bookshelf, any type of woodwork. So we're very grateful for them to helping with the podcast. And then as always, your book, Conversations About Conversations.
Very good. So here's what we're going to do today. This is the second in a multi-part series called Peeling the Pomegranate Part 2.
Exciting. I thought about that. I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you off again. I thought about that all night and all weekend. I really like that concept, that whole, peeling the onion thing. And then I went into the Shrek movie and kind of misquoted because I said ogres are onions, but it's actually ogres have layers like onions is the line that the donkey and Shrek talk about. But yeah, the pomegranate thing is just, it's so beautiful because you go in there, you peel it, you've got all these compartments, and sometimes you got to hang out in some of those compartments and answer questions. And, some of the seeds might not be perfect. So I'm a big fan of this concept.
Even better than what you just said is if you've ever had a pomegranate, the seeds are both sweet and they're also kind of pithy, right? Like there's like, you get like with raspberries, you kind of can get seeds stuck. Pomegranate, same thing. And that's the thing about peeling is you're looking for the sweet stuff, but you're also looking for the pithy stuff. You got to find both the pleasure and the pain when you're going to support someone. So there is pleasure and pain in a pomegranate.
Yeah, all peas.
All peas. I like alliteration.
Yeah, that's what we do here.
So this is a follow-up, as I mentioned last week, about the salesperson, also a listener of this show. By the way, I didn't tell him we were going to record Peeling the Pomegranate Part 1 just for him. And he was all psyched up about that. But anyway, all of us want to improve as professionals. That's why we do the show, to help people improve. That's why we listen. And today we're simulcasting. So Yay. We're both going to be in the podcast registry and YouTube. You excited about that?
So excited. I even put on a nice shirt and tie for you.
You did. I told you I'm just going blue shirt uniform, but you look handsome.
Thanks, buddy. You got to act as if, fake it until you make it.
That is one expression. So peeling the pomegranate, and I like what you said, hanging out in there. When I'm working with this salesperson, going from top 10 to top 2, he realizes that he needs to peel deeper, right? Like he's got the first couple layers of the onion or the beginning, but he's got to peel deeper. We actually did some role play yesterday, so that's one thing we can talk about. But before we go there, again, I want to state the problem here. The problem is people don't probe enough. They don't explore enough. And so their sales presentations or whatever presentations they're making kind of miss the mark. It's like they're shooting an arrow. They're closing their eyes when they're shooting at the target.
Yeah, just kind of throwing the grenade launcher out there and hoping to hit something. I totally understand where you're going with
pasta. Just throwing pasta at the wall.
At the wall, see what sticks.
Yeah. Instead of like, you can size it up. You don't, salespeople, relationship managers, service people, they don't have to guess. Like if you have the art of exploring and probing, like I write about in my book, you don't have to guess. You'll hit the mark every time. But it's definitely an art form. So one thing we'll talk about is I'll start to introduce in this part 2, 14 types of probes. 14. Original recipe
Yeah.
in my book.
Yeah, that might be a second episode there. But before you even jump into that, I just want to point out that it's also much more efficient to shoot the right arrow at the right target, as opposed to just launching arrows out there. Because you're going to waste a lot of time on missed shots and a lot of energy on getting those arrows out there, as opposed to just, maybe taking your time, having more preparation, being more prepared to probe, and getting the right targets with the right arrows.
There's so many metaphors here. You ever hear the one that says advertising, a business without advertising is like winking in the dark?
Nobody sees it.
It's like shooting at the basket without your eye, like with your eyes closed. Like there's so many things. And again, what I've talked about before is sometimes people set an agenda and get agreement for it. Oftentimes people have a solution and a recommendation before they've probed, or they try to address something without doing that. But anyway, we're doing multi-part series on exploring because it's the one I think that's least thought about. Now, before we introduce a couple new ideas, let's go back to the ideas in part one. Do you remember what we covered in part one?
Yeah, peeling the pomegranate. First
Yeah,
couple, getting into it, just kind of starting it up, and then getting into the compartments.
Okay, the two major categories of probes: open-ended and closed-ended. What do you recall as the reasons for open-ended questions? Like, what can you do with open-ended questions?
You can take them anywhere.
Yeah, you're opening it up, creates a dialogue. People will try to use closed-ended questions in order to steer the conversation, but they don't actually steer a conversation. Would you?
Yeah, I mean, you use them as well, closed-ended questions to get buy-in, right? To just make sure that they're in the same place you want them to be, right? Because you
Right.
kind of, when you first start, whether it's a conversation, relationship or sales relationship, whatever it is, it's kind of like you're starting at the 1 yard line. You got to take the ball with this person all the way down to the other side. And so you want to constantly check in that they're at the same place you are. Hence, you use the closed-ended questions to get buy-in. But I agree that having the knowledge to figure out if it's closed-ended or open-ended is kind of like having the right arrow to shoot at the right target.
All right, another metaphor for you. I'm pulling out the metaphors today. So I often preach that people don't use enough open-ended questions. And so people could sometimes get the idea that open-ended are better than closed-ended. And that's not the case. It's the successful combination of open-ended and closed-ended that, I'm going to use a boxing metaphor, which I don't necessarily like fighting. I'm not a fighter. I'm a lover. But it's a good metaphor. It's like open, closed, closed. And I mentioned to you also last time that I think about it like chess. So it's like boxing chess, if you will. Like I'm going to do open, closed. But there's a virtual pandemic, overused word, of closed-ended questions. So I want to steer people towards open-ended, but yeah, remember that open gets it. But I like your football metaphor too. It's like open gets you down the field, but closed-ended gets the completions, gets the receiver to catch the ball.
Yeah. And you've got to be the quarterback and figure out which ones to throw, right? Whether to hand it off or throw it or whatever. And I agree with that.
I always think about myself as the quarterback, even though I've never played quarterback in any systematic way. All right. One more metaphor since we're peeling back metaphors. Or actually, this is an analogy. An open-ended question could be like a crowbar, right? It opens things up. And if you're opening a window, a crowbar is a good thing. But if you're a heart surgeon and you're opening someone's chest to do open heart surgery, you're not going to use a crowbar. You're going to use a scalpel. And so as I introduce some or all of these 14 specific probes, I want you to think some of them are crowbars, some of them are scalpels.
Sure. Are we going to cover all 14, or do you want to do 7 and then leave the last 7 for part 3 of peeling the pomegranate?
Let's see how we explore the exploring tools.
Let's get it.
All right. So the first, there's 9 open-ended. And of course, by way of review, it's going to be what or how. Most of the time, you're going to start with what or how. But the journalist questions, who, what, when, why, what, or how. Of course, why doesn't start with W, but I'm sorry, how doesn't start with W, but how is like one of the best. It's one of the best. So one type of open-ended question is the W questions. That's one of the types of probes. You want to keep those in mind all the time because they are much more of the opening things and the widening things out. But the combination here is what I think is one of the first and most important tools is controlling a conversation by using what I call an open-ended lead.
Sure.
And an open-ended lead is a what or how. It's a W question that includes the topic of what you want to talk about, or it vectors the conversation if it goes off a certain way. So I'll give you an example. You know, I work in finance, and some people will say, they'll ask me a closed-ended question, which one of the things I covered last time is a closed-ended question is a statement, almost always. So they say to me, are you concerned about XYZ candidate winning the election this fall? Okay. Now that's a question, but it's actually a statement, right? Because what do you think they actually mean by that?
They want you to answer it if you're concerned or not.
Maybe, but my experience is that actually what they're saying is, I'm concerned about who's going to win the White House this fall.
And I need you to reinforce or reject my concern.
Yeah, I need you to accept the concern or battle the concern. And that's important how I handle it. Like handling questions, the whole Q&A concept is more important than the topics, more important than that. But I'm going to vector with that. And what I'm probably going to use when someone says, are you concerned about it? Is first of all, the concept, and this is a concept from someone who's one of my role models, Nick Murray. And he said that there's 3 ways to answer a question. One is two, a non-answer answer, or something like, I don't know, or why do you ask? I guess there is 3. Now, why do you ask often gets people on the defensive. So I'm a fan of, well, what prompts you to ask that? Or when they say, are you concerned about it? I may go right back with a closed-end question or an open. What are you concerned about? Or what concerns do you have? Or in other words, answering a question without clarifying it is a recipe for the conversation right then and there going off course. So let's play it out.
Before you do,
yeah.
I was just going to say, sometimes those people just want an answer and then they go right on to the next thing that's on their mind. So if we're talking about shooting arrows, just always know who you're speaking to, because again, sometimes people will ask that question and you just answer it simply. And it's like, hey, I'm not concerned. And then they're like, oh, I'm really not concerned either.
Well, it could be, but what prompts you to ask that question or what makes you ask that question will tell you. Because my hypothesis is they're concerned and they want to tell you why they're concerned, that they actually don't want to understand if you're concerned, even though what they just said was, are you concerned?
I agree. It's almost like, hey, don't mean to cut you off, but I'm going to cut you off anyway. Right.
Well, it's either I want you to be concerned or I want you to not be concerned. But there is, and you can't know which one they want until you say, oh, what prompts you to ask?
Yeah, you can't know which one they want until you understand where they're coming from, what type of person they are, what type of line of work they're in, how they respond to, other questions that you've been kind of building along. And then, yes, when you get to those questions, if it's someone who is looking to share their concern, I agree that, what prompts you to ask that question is a great response. But if it's someone who's just a straight shooter and, is bringing that up as a conversation changer or something, I think it's totally fine to just reply to that and give them what they might be looking for and keep moving.
But there's a difference and by the way, all that's correct. And party affiliation, if you don't know it, you better probe before you answer the question. Yeah. And when I say I'm upset with XYZ candidate, like I deliberately am not saying demo or Republico, because it could be both.
Sure. And usually you can figure those things out just by the way people answer questions, the way they behave, the way they respond to certain things, and the way they carry themselves. You pretty much know which way they're maybe leaning. But yeah, on small percentage of those, again, just answering the question is a good answer.
So you could make it an open-ended clarifying question, like what prompts you to ask, or you could just come back and answer the question with a question like, oh, well, what do you think about the election? But there's a real important distinction between someone who asks, are you concerned about the election? And what do you think about the election? Or how do you feel about the upcoming election? It's a very different place they're coming from. So anyway, we could role play that through, or we could go into another type of probe. What would you like to do?
Let's keep moving.
All right. So we've got
hold on, just so we could recap for the people at home.
Okay.
So the first probing, I guess, way of probing or figuring stuff out is the media questions, right? The who, what, when, where, how.
Yes.
Yeah, journalist questions. And now we're moving on to the second part of that, which is
leads, open-ended leads, or clarifiers.
Okay.
And we've actually talked now about 3 of the 9 open-ended. Clarifiers are what I talked about there, because a lot of these, while they're distinct tools, they go together, they flow together. But yeah, what prompts you to ask is clarifying question. So agreed. Leads, clarifiers, W's, or journalist. And then assessors is another type. So this is a classic one, being in finance, because people will say things like, well, do you use bonds? Like, do you use bonds as part of what you do? And again, it's a do you question. And the standard response in finance is for the finance professional to start lecturing. Well, like not even knowing what the question really is, but well, bonds and bond prices and interest rates may move inversely. And what it can do in a situation like that is kind of be condescending to the client or the prospect. So what I like to do is when someone asks something like that is to assess. And I love the beginning of this phrase or this question is, how familiar are you with bonds? Or in the case of, sometimes people will say, well, I'm thinking about doing options. Well, I need to assess at that point. Have they done it before? Are they experienced with it? Or they have no idea what they're talking about?
Sure. I guess maybe a better analogy is like when your kid comes up to you and he's like, hey, I want to be a professional skateboarder. And it's like, okay, like how much do you know about skateboarding? Or how many times have you gotten on the board? Right? Things like that. But I agree. Yes, you want to definitely know the other person's ability level or understanding level before you start talking about things, because they might not understand it and you're explaining concepts that they never heard of, and now you're opening up wormholes and getting deeper into the weeds that you never wanted to. So yeah, 100% spot on with that.
Those are 2 good points. Like, number one, if you start going down a road that you don't really want to go down, you're losing control of the conversation by answering a question that wasn't asked.
And isn't really that important most of the time, right? Somebody's just checking if you know what you're talking about, and next thing you know, you're 5 minutes into the weeds, and it's just like, it's tough to get out of those, because once you're in the weeds, you have to backpedal all the way back to where you were, and then hope that your derailment hasn't derailed the whole conversation. And a lot of people do that, get into the weeds about things that aren't important in the conversation or the sale or whatever it may be.
You got it. People get stuck in the weeds instead of focusing on the needs. And that's chapter 4 of the book, which is focus on needs. And what you're actually looking for when you're probing and peeling this pomegranate, you're not just looking for seeds. I got the rhymes going here. You're not just looking for seeds, you're looking for needs. And this is another concept, another metaphor. I'm full of metaphors today. You know how people say the question or what the client prospect brings up is just the tip of the iceberg, right? I actually think about, and obviously with that metaphor is you want to look at the iceberg underneath the water as well as that. But I think to be really effective, you actually have to go multiple levels such that you're the iceberg under the water and then the water underneath the iceberg. Like what I think makes me a good relationship manager is the level of depth of the relationships that I have, such that I go really deep when I'm having conversations.
Randy Moss deep.
That's a good metaphor and also problematic in some ways.
Sure. I apply this to coaching. I think that this is one of the areas where those things come up a lot, because kids and athletes in general will ask questions, just to ask questions and bring up things. And then coaches go off on tangents on stuff that's not really important, as opposed to just focusing on what's important to the kid or the athlete, that, what they're trying to accomplish and how you're going to help them accomplish that, as opposed to go off on your tangents and things like that.
Let's switch to the other side of the ledger with that. I'm going to segue with that is a closed-ended probe called an engager or a hook. And yeah, when a kid comes up to you and they're asking you a question, it could be to kind of hook you or get your attention. You know how they say kids value, and this is true of adults too, but kids value attention so much that they'll misbehave just to get your attention. Engagers and hooks are a tool to keep someone engaged in the conversation. Classic mistake that professionals will use is they'll just talk and talk and talk, and they won't stop to say, "Are you still with me? Is this still working for you?" You get what I'm saying, right? And that vectors off into a number of different things that we can talk about with rapport at some point, with when people are visual people, using that hook of, do you see what I mean? Or if they're auditory people, do you hear what I'm saying? Or kinesthetic people, does that resonate with you? Does that click for you? So that's a whole nother thing, but engagers and hooks, I was glad you kind of brought that up.
Yeah, you always got to check in, because like you said, if you end up talking for a long time, people get lost. I mean, people forget most of the things that they learned in a day. It's something like 80%. So imagine in a 20-minute conversation, how much of that the people actually retain. And so it's so important to check back in and just simply ask, like, hey, does that make sense? Does that flow with what you're trying to accomplish? Or however you want to phrase that, doesn't really matter. It's just more important about doing the steps. It's almost like drinking water on a long hike or a long journey. And if you don't hydrate, you're not going to complete the journey. And just remembering to hydrate and stopping and doing those things is going to help you a lot more.
It's like if you're trying to give someone water, and instead of, you getting water too? You got water?
I am.
All right. The expression, right, is drinking from a fire hose. And what do we do as professionals in finance, or really anything that you're the expert and the prospect is a novice or just has less information than you, we give them lots of information. Or one more metaphor here, we give them a steak, they eat it, and then we give them another steak, and they're just chewing on the steak, but it's not good steak. They don't enjoy it anymore, no matter how good the steak is.
Because
Then it becomes a mistake.
Mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to do one or two more?
I just want to, before we move on there,
Yeah.
just go back to the water drinking just now. I think that at the expert level of conversations, which is where you're at, you start to pick up little things in a conversation. Like, for example, where we talked about water, you drank water, and then I drank water because I got thirsty. But little things like that in a conversation, like mimicking, right? So your prospect goes to drink water, you drink water, right? Your prospect follows what you're saying, they repeat what you're saying. Those are all things you want to pick up on, and those are all little clues that the arrows you're shooting are the correct arrows, right? Because if you're going through a conversation and they're going the other way, you know that the arrows you're using are going blank, and you want to switch it up, reach into your quiver and get other arrows more designed for this types of conversations. Boom.
Boom. Boom goes the dynamite.
That's it.
All right. I'm looking at the list here of my open and my closed ended. And let's see. I would say, along with assessors, the open ended, how much do you know about X, is motivators. Like trying to understand what motivates somebody. So the clarifiers, like what prompts you to ask that, could be followed up with what's their motivation. So I'll go back to the president example. So if one of my clients right now is on the quote right side of the spectrum, right now they could be fearing a Democratic sweep. And they might say things like, oh, I'm really, are you concerned about the Democrats winning, right? Which, again, my hypothesis right there, although I have to clarify it, is they're concerned about the Democrats winning. Why? Because Democrats are thought to raise taxes. And so they're thinking right in their wallet, like, this is going to cost me money if the Democrats win. And so I want to find out their motivation. Now, I could assume their motivation is that their taxes are going to go up and they want to avoid that. But I could just ask, like, if the Democrats win, how does that affect you? How does that impact you? What would the result be? So all of those are things that they then admit. Because I haven't introduced this yet, but this is a really important concept when it comes to needs-based conversations, is what you're looking for when you probe, and the successful definition of probing. And this is heavy here, and takes a while. Like with my mentees and my coaching clients, I beat the drum here. You're looking for a clear, complete, and mutual understanding of the needs. And they're all three of those are important. Like, you're peeling and you want to make sure it's clear. You want to do it in such a way that it's complete. Like all of the concern, like someone says, I'm concerned about the Democrats winning, or of course, I'm concerned about Trump winning. I mean, like, there's concern. So you got to peel that pomegranate, because there's sweetness and there's pithiness, and you want to get to the level of concern underneath the iceberg. So clear, complete, and mutual, that is a new drumbeat that we're going to do here. Clear, complete, mutual. All right, I dropped that knowledge.
This is great knowledge. Nobody's concerned about Kanye winning.
Well, I did see on the headline this morning is Kanye drops his support of Trump, which was kind of obvious, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no matter what, we're going to have a winner, and it's, going to be one of the parties or whatever, but there's definitely going to be a winner like every other time. And don't want to get too political on this, but I understand where you're going. And it's always important to figure out those concerns. I think the bigger thing there is just where you are in the conversation, right? Sometimes people will feel like they need to ask questions just to make sure that they sound like they might know what they're talking about.
Right.
Otherwise, if they don't ask the questions, they themselves feel like they're not a part of it or educated enough or whatever. So I think, depending on where you are, and I think the way to identify that is if you just talked about X and then out of nowhere comes Y, that's usually just somebody reaching for something, and again, either answering that question or probing a little bit further is, far enough. But if they start a conversation with one of those harder questions, right, then I think you need to probe harder, because there's obviously things there that you need to bring up to the surface to answer and address.
You got it.
Faux show.
What are how questions? And this was something my tour mentor taught me. He's like, when in doubt, go with, what do you think? How do you feel? What's your opinion? Those three questions. Like someone says, I'm concerned about the election. Oh, what do you think about it? And of course, it's not just mechanical. Like you have to actually be sincerely interested in what they think about it. But instead of, oh, well, I'm not concerned if the Democrats win, or I'm not concerned if Trump gets reelected, that's totally shot in the dark. It's totally shooting at the hoop without opening your eyes, or shooting at the goal without looking at it, knowing where it is. What do you think? And with sincerely, like, what do you think? How do you feel? Well, what's your opinion? And you may think like, oh, well, I'm the expert, I'm the professional, so I should just answer that. But usually someone says, are you concerned about it? They want to tell you their opinion. All right. I think it's time to review a lot of the stuff that we did, and then tell our listeners and watchers on this episode what they need to do next.
Sure.
But before that, how about a word from our sponsors?
Absolutely. Another live ad read from our sponsors here. So first and foremost, thank you so much to 503 Building for all their custom crafts and woodworking things that they make. Great tables, cabinets, bookshelves, planners, anything you need made out of wood. 503 Building is the way to go. And then obviously Conversations, a great book that we encourage you to read and give feedback on if you have a minute.
Yeah, we put so much of the book into this episode. It really is the keystone. Look at that. There it is. Whoop, there it is. Yep, that's it.
How to manage your business relationships one conversation at a time.
I love it. I love it. I have some big news, and I don't know if I should drop it in this episode or the next episode. You want to hear the big news?
Drop it.
I'm going to write a second book.
That's what I'm talking about.
I'm going to write a second book called, I think, it's a working title, Clear Rules for Conversations. And it's going to have a lot more of the dialogues, role play, a little more of a workbook, very practical. So anyway, stay tuned. I'm giving myself a long time to write this book, but I started working on it this week.
I like workbooks, especially things with pictures. And then
you like coloring books?
Pop-up stories, yes. As an athlete, those are the books that we relate to the most. But yeah, those are always fun. I think that's a great idea, especially in a lot of these places where, you read through the book and have an opportunity to practice it or kind of write down some of those things. I think that's great, especially for conversations. I was also going to say you should just call it Talking About Talking, and it would accomplish the same thing there.
I thought about that for the title of this podcast. Okay, thank you, sponsors. We greatly appreciate you. I want to encourage our listeners to do a few things. So, number one, I want you to start thinking about the amount of questions that you're using in your conversations. I want you to, if you can, become conscious about closed-ended and open-ended. And then before you go into a conversation, instead of thinking about the topics that you could go over or the sales part that you could do, start to write down questions that you're going to ask of the person. Like you really think through. Now, that's a whole nother chapter of planning. planning and preparing for conversations, but it's all mixed together, all 10 chapters mixed together. So pay attention to the type of questions, the amount of questions, and then start thinking about which ones am I using? Which ones are the ones we went over? And just by a review, we went over leads, assessors, motivators, clarifiers, W's, and engagers and hooks. And there's more, but we'll save those for part 3.
Yeah, there's definitely always more. And just a side piece on that, I think that's a great idea. Just writing down your questions, preparing yourself, mainly because as you get better, you're not going to have to write them down as often. You'll just remember. And then it's just plug and play. Some questions are going to work better in certain situations and you'll remember that. And then some questions are going to fail and you'll remember not to ask those. So again, great exercise, great idea, great advice.
Well, Jacob, good to see you. Thank you for being a part of this conversation about conversations.
Thank you for having me, buddy.
We'll see you soon.